Well, I can't wait to try this. So
Yeah, I'm
cheers.
ready. Cheers, virtual cheers.
Yes, virtual cheers. Thank you for doing this. And here we go.
Mm.
Oh, that is delicious.
Yeah, absolutely. It's classic cocktail in a glass. It's history in a glass.
It is history in a glass. And on such a hot summer day, there's just nothing like a really well crafted cocktail to
Yeah,
have
and
you
this is
discover.
and this is great because we're recording on July 3rd. It's a day off for everybody in anticipation of tomorrow. So yeah, it's nice. It's 2 in the afternoon, but it's okay. We're enjoying a cocktail.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere and we're working, so it's okay if you're
Yeah.
working, right?
Welcome to the Titanic Provenance Files. The story of Titanic told through the evidence she left behind. I'm Damon Henrichs, a lifelong Titanic enthusiast with a degree in 20th century history from Northwestern University. In each case file, we follow one object, document, artifact, book, image, or piece of testimony into the larger story of Titanic. Because the most interesting question is often not what happened, it's how do we know what happened? You just listened to today's guest, Veronica Hinke, author of The Last Night on the Titanic, Unsinkable Drinking, Dining, and Style. Today's case file is a little bit different. It begins not with wreckage or china or a passenger letter, but with a recipe. This is our very first Sip and Ship episode. The idea is simple. Let's bring Titanic people together over a drink, loosen the collar a bit, and see what history looks like when the conversation is allowed to breathe a little bit. For this first one, Veronica and I make a classic Robert Burns cocktail and pair it with shortbread cookies. Veronica's work explores Titanic through food, drink, dining, style, service, but most importantly, the human stories behind the menus. Her book is not simply a recipe book, although it is an excellent recipe book. It's a deeply researched look at the world Titanic's passengers inhabited, from grand meals and cocktails to the small details that bring individual lives back into focus. So pour a drink if you like, grab a cookie if you have one, and join us for our first Sip and Ship. This is Veronica Hinke on the Titanic Provenance Files. Veronica, welcome to the Titanic Provenance Files.
Thank you, Damon. Thank you for having me on the Providence Files. This is wonderful to meet with you.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you. As we mentioned before we hit record, I've read your book. I've enjoyed it. So it was a super thrill to have you on. This is our first Sip and Ship episode, which means we're literally going to make a cocktail and we're going to taste it. We're going to pair it with shortbread cookies, which my wife and I made last night. I'm assuming you've made yours. I'm not the best baker, but I think they turned out okay. But we're going to use that as a way to get into Titanic's world. So before we get into mixology, let's establish what our quote-unquote object is today. As I said, it's not an artifact, as it's a recipe. So when we look at something like the Robert Burns cocktail and the shortbread, what are we working with here? What kind of evidence is this?
Well, and like you said, it's recipe evidence. And we don't have any recipes from the Titanic, but we have recipes of things that we can assume were consumed aboard the Titanic, and many things that we know for sure from menus, letters home, and so forth. And one of the things that we don't have a recipe of to know for sure exactly how they made it is the Robert Burns cocktail. But that's when we turn to people like Frank Caiafa, who is the author. He redid the Waldorf Astoria bar book. And in his book, he included his recipe for the Robert Burns, which, do you want me to share it with you?
Absolutely. Because I know your book has a couple different versions of it in there. So think it's safe to say there's more of a traditional recipe, which may have been served on the Titanic, and then more of a modern interpretation. Is that fair to say?
Yes, and one of my modern interpretations is lavender. Lavender Robert Burns. I just make it with um, lavender, a little bit of lavender, simple syrup, or you can use lavender bitters. And the recipe that Frank includes many different variations of the Robert Burns as well. Some of them have Benedictine, and there's just so many different varieties. And today I'm going to make with you, Damon, the lavender variety. That is my variation.
Okay, excellent. I'm gonna make the traditional one, so I won't be able to taste yours, but I'm sure we can virtually compare and contrast.
Yes, and I love to make my shortbread cookies for this cocktail with lavender. I either put lavender buds right into the dough, or I'll put in, a little bit of lavender sugar in place of just regular sugar. I have all different kinds of ways of making lavender cookies, and I made these last night with a little bit of lavender buds in them, little sugared lavender buds. They're very sweet. They're, of course, edible. And then I garnish my Robert Burns with lavender for this.
You mentioned lavender sugar. I'd be curious how you just logistically, how do you infuse the sugar with lavender?
I just mix in the lavender buds with the sugar and let it sit. I do this with salt too. I'll
Okay,
make
so
like
it just sort of naturally absorbs it.
yeah.
There's no need to melt it down and try and make
No.
new sugar cubes or anything.
You can make a simple syrup where you take a cup of water, cup of sugar, and maybe a quarter cup of lavender buds and boil that together and strain it, and then you have a lavender syrup. But yeah, this is real easy to make.
Nice. Well, let's get to it. It's a sip and ship episode, so let's start working towards sipping. But yeah, so I'm gonna put some ice into my mixer, and then from your book, the first ingredient I saw was 2 ounces of a blended Scotch whiskey. What would you say is the difference between just a traditional, a Tennessee whiskey versus a Scotch whiskey?
Well, the key is blended, and you want to definitely use a Scotch whiskey for this cocktail because it's dedicated to Scotch heritage. So the key is blended, meaning some of the whiskey is made from malt and some from wheat. And it's mixed together. So blended Scotch whiskey. And that's just one big thing that you want to make sure you have for sure. Two things, the Scotch and the blended. It has to be Scotch and blended. You know what, though? You can still use Tennessee whiskey if that's what you have on hand. In fact, today I was making some baked beans for the weekend, and I
Yum.
love to put some whiskey in. And all I had, what do I have here? I got Templeton rye, and it's so
Okay.
good in baked beans. And I thought, well, I'm going to talk to Damon and make him my baked beans. I'm going to make this with Templeton rye, but don't tell anybody.
I love it. I know your original or one of the versions in the book suggests Johnny Walker Black, which I went to get some, but my local liquor store rep suggested for me something called Isle of Skye, which was new. I got a 12-year-old. It was delicious, actually. So I'm going a little off recipe, so to speak. And then I'm using Antica Formula sweet vermouth. So putting in 1 ounce of that. Trying my best not to make my office into a dirty kitchen. Oh, and so then what I was going to do is I don't have I'm not sure what the term is for the thing that you would actually give. No, the thing that you use to give a dash of something. I don't have the right. tool for
Oh,
that. So,
it's
so I'm just gonna give my glass an absinthe rinse, so to speak, and then pour it out, which I think will be about the equivalent of a dash or two of absinthe, which I'm sure, as you know, a little bit of absinthe can go a long way.
yes. Good thinking. This is a great idea to replace that gadget you don't have.
What? So yeah, I mean, absinthe, even such a tiny amount, I mean, it changes the whole room, right? And historically, absinthe has almost a, I don't know, a theatrical reputation. I feel like there's some history and drama around just absinthe as a word, as a drink. Could you go into that a little bit?
Well, I haven't studied it a whole lot, but my understanding is that there have been periods in history when absinthe was frowned upon and sort of a drink of a culture that was, you know, not the prominent culture, not something that was always the most acceptable. So, um, lately though, I'd say in the last 10 years or so, it's become more fashionable and cultural again to drink absinthe.
I'm not a big fan of, I, for lack of a better term, that like the licorice flavor that comes out of it. But I think it's a great enhancer in a cocktail. I know some people drink it straight and they do the whole where like they melt it through a sugar cube or something. That's never been something that I look forward to. But I know some people swear by it. I don't know, what do they call it? What was the movie with Follow the Green Fairy or something? I feel like at some point they felt like it was a lot more dangerous of a cocktail than it is.
Yeah, I think you nailed it with that description. And one of the reasons I love cocktail culture is the gadgets, the dispensers, like the absinthe dispensers are so beautiful from the Edwardian period. And
Yeah, they're very steampunk looking almost,
yes,
or can
which
be.
and they can be, and then some of them can be almost pre-Raphael, like how do you say pre-Raphael?
Right.
I haven't said that in so long, but I think you know what I mean. The pre-Raphael lights, um, that definitely like Art Deco look.
Yeah. So I've got everything in. The only other question I guess would be bitters, which I'd be curious your thoughts. I heard bitters described as what salt is to food, bitters is to a cocktail, which is to say that it's a flavor enhancer. It brings out what's already there in a unique way. But of course, there's flavored, different bitters. So I guess they bring it out in different ways, different percentages. What are your thoughts on bitters and what it does for this cocktail?
What a great way to describe it about like the salt. I love to use bitters, like you said, for flavor. I think you have to have them in an old fashioned,
Hmm.
for example. There are just some must haves with it. One of the things I love to do, I like to celebrate Arbor Day with black walnut bitters
Oh,
because,
okay.
or maple bitters, maple simple syrup, or maple syrup alone as a flavor enhancer.
Yeah,
But
great for an old fashioned also.
yeah, maple old fashions are so good. But when I want to have friends over to celebrate, one of my favorite days of the year, Arbor Day, I just love celebrating it. I always think of something, what can we do that's a little unusual? And so black walnut bitters really heightens the flavor and intensity of an old fashioned or um, any kind of cocktail, really. So there's so many things you can do with bitters. Right now I've got cocoa bitters, ginger, of course, the lavender that we're working with today. Um, I have peach bitters, and I'll be using that in the coming weeks when peaches become more popular. It's from Woodford Reserve. It's bourbon barrel aged, and I love to put that in an old fashioned. Have a peach old fashioned.
Nice. Yeah, I found with some of the sweeter bitters, mole bitters or peach bitters, I find that you almost have to tweak the simple syrup or the sugar content a little bit because it can get a little syrupy. Uh, there's definitely diminishing returns, I think, on it. You have to be careful with it.
It's definitely less is more. Just, if you think you want to add another dash, don't do it.
Exactly. Angostura you can get away with, but yeah, with some of the flavored ones, there's definitely a sweeter element, I feel like, to it. Okay, mine's ready. I don't know how far along you are.
Oh, I was waiting until you finished yours, so I'll get started on mine now. And like I said, so I'm going to use a jigger and a half of blended Scotch whiskey.
Okay.
But don't tell anyone I'm using aged 4-year-old aged Templeton rye.
Okay, good.
Okay, and then I'm going to make it with sweet vermouth, and about a half a jigger of sweet vermouth goes into the shaker. I've got a shaker full of ice here, and I hope you can hear me okay.
I can?
Because I'm over at my bar across from my computer.
I was going to say, I can definitely hear you across the room, but I can still hear you.
Okay, good. And then, just like I said, just 1 or 2 drops of lavender bitters. And then a lemon peel. And when you're talking about flavors and heightening and intensifying flavors and really making things pop, adding salt, like you mentioned, lemon just does it all. Any fresh lemon zest is so wonderful, especially in this drink.
Well, we taste with our nose so much. I've read somewhere what some crazy high percentage of taste actually is smell.
Yeah.
So yeah, when you adding that lemon twist gives you a prequel of the cocktail.
Yeah, so I've got it in the shaker. I'm going to also use it as a garnish. So here goes. I'm going to give this about 30 revolutions in my cocktail shaker.
Nice.
And I just can't imagine a drink any other way than from a cocktail shaker.
I went the opposite route. I did the anti-James Bond method. I stirred it instead of shaking.
And what kind of glass did you put yours in?
I put mine in I'm going to screw it up, the name.
Coupe?
It's the coupe variation. The something and something, Molly and somebody, I forget.
Okay.
It's a little bit more here, I'll show you. It's the little more tulip shaped one.
Oh yeah, I call that a coupe glass too.
Okay, I think the classic coupe glass is a little more martini-ish shaped, whereas this one, it's got 2 names to it. And I can't remember what they are.
I know what you mean, though. Yeah, I'm trying
We'll
to
put
remember.
we'll put it in the show notes.
Oh, I smell that lemon. It smells so good.
Yeah. When I had to prep everything, so I was cutting the lemon, and as I was getting the lemon peel ready, I'm just like, it's on my hands. I could smell it. I mean, it's crazy how just making one little sliver of a lemon twist can just release so much smell. It's crazy.
Damon, I don't think I have left a grocery store without fresh lemons in years, and I go to the store twice a week, so I just have to have them all the time.
Yeah, lemon and limes too. Definitely mandatory staples.
Well, I can't wait to try this. So cheers.
Yeah, I'm ready. Cheers, virtual cheers.
Yes, virtual cheers. Thank you for doing this, and here we go. Oh, that is delicious.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's classic cocktail in a glass. I mean, it's history in a glass.
It is history in a glass, and on such a hot summer day, there's just nothing like a really well-crafted cocktail.
And this is great because we're recording on July 3rd. It's a day off for everybody in anticipation of tomorrow. So yeah, it's nice. It's 2 p.m, but it's okay. We're enjoying a cocktail.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere, and we're working, so it's okay
Yes.
if you're working, right?
Well, yeah, and of course I made one of these last night, so I wouldn't be completely surprised because actually I hadn't had a Robert Burns before, and very much enjoyed it. Sent you a picture that I was doing quote unquote show prep. So yes, very excited. So, I mean, yeah. So why don't you talk to me about what we're tasting here?
Oh, I'm dying to hear what you think of your flavors, but if you want me to go first, I will. I am just delighted. It's just got all the flavors of summer, from lavender from my garden, lemons fresh from the market, the ice cold from shaking it in the shaker, with ice cubes from the store. I buy them. I don't make them because when they're smaller, they're real tiny. I like to get them from the store and shake them like that. And then
Hmm.
like I said, just a hint of the lavender bitters. You bring up such a good point, Damon, that hey, at some point it becomes a simple syrup. So cool it on the bitters if it's like flour bitters.
Yeah, easy.
Angostura, like you said, is okay to stretch it a little bit, but just a couple drops of that lavender, and then it's so important what kind of scotch you use. For this kind of drink, if you're going to put the effort into getting out your shaker, getting nice barware out, you need to, like what you did, going to the store and talking with someone about what would you buy for this? What do you recommend? Frank Caiafa, speaking of him just now, is someone I've asked many times, like, what should I get for this, Frank? And it's just so important to kind of do your research like that and put a little bit of time and thought into it. So mine's delicious. I can't wait to hear how yours is tasting for you.
Mine is fantastic. I confess, Scotch is not usually my favorite spirit, but this blends it so well. I mean, the sweetness of the vermouth, like you said, the summer bite of the lemon, and then the orange bitters, ties it all together. I think it's just a really well balanced cocktail. I mean, it's definitely a cocktail. I mean, we're not going to slam this, but yeah, as much as something as strong as this could be, it's delightfully refreshing.
Delightful. And I've got my cookie too, and I always have 3 cookies with the Robert Burns. It seems customary. And how's your cookie tasting?
I hope it's great. I mean, I think it tastes delicious. Like I said, I'm not a baker by trade, but I think they came out wonderful. I enjoy them. It's got a little crumbly, a little crisp. It's not super sweet, overly sweet like a chocolate chip cookie or something would be. I think it's something that could go great with a cocktail, which surprised me when you said, "Hey, let's make the Robert Burns and shortbread cookies." I was like, I've never thought of eating cookies with a cocktail before. I'm
I
eating
had
one right now.
good. It looks beautiful. How does it taste?
Oh, it's great. Um, Now, not too sweet, and you can kind of even, but you can monitor the sweetness level a little bit yourself by the amount of powdered sugar you put on it. So you can sort of self-regulate it.
Right. And I sent you pictures of my America 250 version of shortbread cookies with red, white, and blue sprinkles. And I have my Robert Burns cocktail with lights, red, white, and blue lights around it. And so we did a little variation for America 250 too.
I love it. I love the idea of food pairings too. So this is what's going on here. Would you say? I know food pairings. A lot of times we pair a specific food with a specific wine or cocktail for flavor concerns. I feel like we're blending this one also for historical reference. Is it a little bit of both?
It absolutely is. And we are blending historical reference here. I'll never forget my first Robert Burns. It was 2015. I had heard a lot about them. I had written about them from my first Robert Burns in a restaurant. I had made them at home, but I went to the Waldorf Astoria right before they closed for renovations in Manhattan. And I went to the bar and ordered a Robert Burns. It was a rainy day. I love rainy days in New York. And I, just went up to the bar. We'll never forget this. And I was going to try a Robert Burns. Frank was the bar manager then, and he wasn't there that day, but that was the day I was visiting. And so I went and had my Robert Burns. And the bartender put down a plate of shortbread cookies next to my drink. And of course, I was thinking right away, whoa, what's this going to cost me? And I didn't order it. I better say something to this guy.
This is New York City, after all.
Yeah. And I said, sir, I didn't order these cookies. He said, ma'am, he said, the Robert Burns cocktail is always served with a shortbread cookie. And in this case, 3. So
That's amazing. I had never heard that. And yeah, and you're a food expert and had never heard it either. So it's so fun. I mean, we learn something every day.
I think the cookie custom is relatively a modern day celebration of this drink. And it started probably in the last 10 years. Well, it would have been 15 years probably. And, like I said, I had never ordered one of these drinks while I was out. If you go into a bar nowadays and order a Robert Burns, you might still get a quizzical look from a bartender or a mixologist even. Depending on where you go, if you're at the Violet Hour in Chicago, nobody's going to look at you sideways. But if you go into most bars, I think people are still going to have to maybe look it up or, maybe ask questions. Well, what's in it?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a deep cut.
It is a deep cut. And I'm so glad we are now cutting into it and we're hearing more and more about this drink. It became very popular in the Edwardian years and even more so later on. There's a lot of debate over why they call it the Robert Burns. Is it named after the very celebrated poet from Scotland, Robert Burns, who wrote Auld Lang Syne, which we all know and love that song? Or is it named after a cigar salesman at the Waldorf Astoria? There are many people today who would tell you it's the cigar salesman. I like to think of it, Damon, as you drink this in honor of whoever you want to celebrate in those contexts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the poet and the Scottish connection is a little more adjacent to the Titanic story, I guess. But if I'm really being honest, after reading the versions in your book, I'm like, it probably really is just named after this random sales guy who's a regular at the bar. He probably is like, this is pretty good. He's like, cool, I'll name it after you. I know that happens all the time.
Yeah, and I would sort of lean more in the direction of the poet because of the cookies. And
Okay.
The cookies are a key ingredient, not a key ingredient, but a key item on the menu for Robert Burns Night, which is January 25th each year. People celebrate it now more than ever lately. They have Burns Night suppers. They don't call them dinner.
So the date, is that celebrating his birthday or something else significant?
Yes, his birthday.
Okay.
Yeah, January 25th. And the customary menu is neeps and tatties, which is turnip, which we call turnips, but in Scotland you'd hear it more like turnip. And they're shortened to neeps, and tatties, of course, potatoes. And those get mixed together into a really lovely side dish.
So is that the kind of a vegetarian shepherd's pie that you sent me pictures of?
Yes, for Burns Night, I like to make a vegetarian shepherd pie with the neeps and tatties on top of the pie. And I love to make it, just as an aside, I love to make it with decorate it with a cake decorating bag and tip to make it look really pretty. And then, and I just love turnips. They're beautiful. I think I might have sent you a picture of a whole turnip. They're lavender colored. They're delicious when you boil them. And I like to boil them and mash them just like you would your mashed potatoes. Mm-hmm. And then I mix it with the mashed potatoes. And then I put, for my Burns Night supper, I put, lentils and vegetables and made in beef or in a veggie broth. And then I cover that with the potatoes and bake it. And what you would have instead, to be more true to history, would be haggis, which is sheep offal. The organs of a sheep, the heart, liver. I don't have that for my Burns Night, and I think a lot of people shy away from it because they're not real comfortable with cooking those ingredients.
Guilty here. I wouldn't have the first clue how to start. And I consider myself somewhat of a foodie. But yeah, that definitely is outside my wheelhouse.
And then for dessert, this is where we get to the shortbread cookie. You can have shortbread cookies, or you can have, if you want to really stay true to the customary Burns night supper, is Cranachan, Cranachan. It's a trifle of cream, berry mixture, like a berry jelly, and cookies, shortbread cookies. So you can do one or the other or both, but shortbread is incorporated either way.
Yeah, both of them.
Yeah, and so the fact that the shortbread cookies are riffed from that traditional supper menu makes me think that people really do tend to go towards the name being from the Scottish poet.
So, how does Robert Burns, and I guess this is partially a segue into talking about Jock Hume, what is the connection there with Titanic?
They were from the same town. Jock, they called him Jock, but his name was John. Hume, Hume, was the first violinist. He was part of the band that played on aboard the Titanic, and a very amazing story of resilience his story is. And he was from Dumfries, Scotland, which is the same town where Robert Burns, the poet, was from.
Gotcha.
So 100 years later, but there is that tie-in there with the Titanic and the Robert Burns being popular at the time, the cocktail, and Dumfries, Scotland.
You may not know the answer to this. I'm a former musician. So Walter Hartley is the band leader and was also a violinist, but John Hume is the first violin. They sound like that, and in an orchestra in my head, that would be the same thing.
Huh. And maybe it's because when Wallace Hartley was serving in that capacity, his first violinist role went to Jock Hume, but I don't know the answer.
I do know there was no violist. I'm a former violist, so I don't know if it's sad or happy that there wasn't a violist that drowned on the Titanic. We can insert your viola joke here.
You have so many interests, Damon. It's wonderful. I didn't know you played an instrument.
Yeah, a jack of all trades and all that good stuff. So I want to transition a little bit here, into just sort of Edwardian drinking culture as a whole. So we've talked about how there are some menus that have survived from the dinner, but I don't think there's a menu that's survived like a cocktail menu. But in my mind, I'm sort of thinking, well, there wouldn't even be one, right? I mean, in Edwardian culture, you don't go into a bar like you would now and see, ask, can I see your cocktail menu? What specialty cocktails do you have? I mean, I assume people would go in and they know what they want to order and the bartender knows how to make it.
Right. There were no cocktail menus that I know of, and I think I would have heard of them. There are very few menus left at all, but I don't believe that I've never seen where there's ever been a cocktail menu, and it wouldn't have been in restaurants at the time either. There wouldn't be menus dedicated to cocktails necessarily, like we have today. There might have been something similar, but nothing quite like what we have today.
Right. You wouldn't go in and see a paragraph description of a Manhattan. You would see, yes, we have a Manhattan.
And the flowery words and all the different ingredients that are from all over the place. Yeah, that's a modern day tradition.
So I'd like to shift to gears to a luxury ingredient question. I read several passengers, but the one I'm remembering is Arthur Peuchen, who took 3 oranges and a good luck charm with him when he was, and left things behind worth much more money as he was preparing to get on the lifeboat. And today, an orange is just an orange, but in 1912, my understanding is that was kind of a unique and much more seasonal ingredient for sure. What can we talk about that? And are there any other things that we would consider commonplace today that would have been unique and interesting back in 1912?
That's the best example. They would have been really special. An orange would have been very special. And um, you're leading into another cocktail here too, by the way.
Oh,
Maybe it's
okay.
so, but it's making me think of the Bronx cocktail, which was really popular at the time.
Yeah. So that's sweet vermouth, dry vermouth, orange juice, and gin, I think.
Gin, yes.
Yeah. That was, I was, if it hadn't been the Robert Burns, that was the one I was hoping you would have said.
I was leaning that way too, because that's a great.
Especially when you get actual freshly squeezed orange juice, which is a totally different drink than store-bought orange juice.
Yes, and you got to have fresh with this drink. But other ingredients that were, really coveted at the time were, of course, oysters. They were all over the menus. And, the a la carte restaurant had caviar, and there were so many special things in first class. The Titanic left. She started heading across the Atlantic from Queenstown, Ireland, which is now called Cobh.
Mm-hmm.
And that area is within proximity, or close enough proximity to where the gigas variety of oysters are. So there might have been a lot of those on board. It would make sense that there would have been GIGAS.
Okay.
And for my book, I talked with Sandy Ingber from, at the time he was with the Grand Central Oyster Bar in New York City, and not too far from the Waldorf Astoria. And he gave me a lot of great information that I included in the book about oysters. And he said that he tries to pick out the best oysters by, talking to the fish market, going to the fish market, like kind of like what you did with your scotch the other day, and talking to the person there.
Right.
And to make sure that you follow the safety regulations that are provided on websites like the U.S. Department of Agriculture and so forth. Make sure there's not any kind of noticeable odor or an unpleasant smell. And make sure they're closed tightly. When you buy them, if the oyster mongers hand you a bunch and you see some that are open, don't take those.
Right. The same thing with clams. I know when some friends of mine do a clam bake, and the same thing.
And I always try to use a cloth to make sure when I'm using a shucking knife, I don't injure myself. So I always use a towel, a kitchen towel. One of those, flour sack towels are great for that. And one of the tricks that I use with oysters is, if I can't get them to open right away, Damon, I will pop them in the microwave for, maybe 45 seconds. Just heat them up just a little bit, and then you'll be able to get your oyster open.
Modern day trick.
Yes. Yeah, and they didn't have those tricks
In
aboard the
1912.
Titanic, but they did have a lot of oysters.
Yeah, I know. I live in Houston, so there's plenty of oysters from Galveston and whatnot, but warm water oysters are quite a bit different than cold water oysters. I know when you go to, my daughter lives in Boston, we go there and they have an oyster menu. They will bring out, that this is from Stevens Cove and this is from Jackson Point, or, and each place where the oyster comes from. I know you were mentioning,
Gigas?
yes, that they would have come from this, from Gigams? Gigat? No, I'm good. No,
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's GIGAS. Gigas is what I call
Gigas.
it.
Okay. My friends went to Texas A&M, which is their slogan is Gig'em. So I had that in my head. But yeah, so I'm sure those Gigas oysters have a particular flavor profile that would be totally different than if they'd gotten it in somewhere in Liverpool or something. And that's one of the neat things about oysters, I think.
And that's one of the things we don't know too. And that's why I bring it up, because we have no idea necessarily the specific type of oyster or where it came from. And we can only surmise by going, okay, where did they head across the Atlantic Ocean from? That's probably where they would have wanted to get the freshest oysters for serving in first class. They did have.
So you're saying the Gigas oysters, we don't have the Provenance Trail for that, so to speak. That we know that they were called that, but we don't know where they came from actually.
Right. Yeah.
Oh wow,
Well,
that's
we
cool.
know. Well, with the provenances here is we don't know the type of oysters for sure that were on board, so we can assume that they were probably from that area.
Okay,
And Gigas is a big variety there.
got it. So we know they had lots of oysters. Assume they came from the most freshest location that they could be, which makes us guess that they were Gigas oysters.
Yeah.
Got
And
it.
you know, it's just so perfect that you thought of this book to focus on for Titanic Provenance, because all of the things that were put together in my book really have ties to things like letters people wrote home, and there was really a lot of digging that had to happen to put things like this together. I looked at the menu at Delmonico's in New York City 6 months after the Titanic to see that they had something very similar to the Punch Romaine on a big dinner menu for the Asiatic Society. They called it a brandy sherbet.
Brandy sherbet.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had a version of that at the dinner I went to, which I think was probably a situationally challenged variation, so to speak, because I'm pretty sure they didn't make it with the egg whites and whatnot, but it was still yummy and refreshing. It kind of made me want to make a truly authentic one. Yeah, so you mentioned going and finding authentic menus and things from the time. It kind of got me thinking of, I know some of the stuff in the book is an attempt to be dead on, like, hey, this probably was there on the Titanic. Some of it's a little more adjacent. For example, the martini, while served certainly in the Waldorf Astoria, probably John Jacob Astor himself never actually drank one, which is, pour one out for John Jacob, because that's a shame.
Yeah. And yeah, I hear what you're saying.
So back to the shortbread recipe. For a cookie, I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, it's butter, flour, sugar, and you can do some variations. Yet you can go even simpler than that, which is basically flour and water and maybe a little bit of salt, and you have hardtack. And, someone like Charles Joughin, which I'm not even entirely sure I pronounced that correctly. But that's what
Joughin?
Joughin.
Joughin.
Thank
But
you.
close. Yeah.
I mean, I know he was, going around making sure that the boats, in particular his boat number 10, was supplied with some things to take in case they were in the water for a while. I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the difference between something that would be served up in first class with a cocktail, and yet you take away a few ingredients and you have a hardcore survival food.
Well, that's it. Just the bottom line. You take out a few ingredients and you take out the more luxurious ingredients, and you have, things that they would have had in third class or hardtack, like you mentioned. They would have had hardtack for the lifeboats. Charles Joughin was loading loaves of bread. That was one of the steps on his checklist, to make sure that all the lifeboats had as many loaves of bread as they could possibly, share with everyone. And so he was really focused on that. Charles' story is remarkable. He's remembered throughout history because of, he admitted during the British inquiry that he, as he put it, went down and had a nip. And he had been drinking in his cabin, in his quarters, and very likely he would have had access to, fruit, wheat, and things from the bakery, that he could have had his own makeshift still. A group of crew members might have had a makeshift still. Who knows? We have no knowledge of that. But when he says he went down to get a nip, we can only imagine that it must have been something that was really accessible. Somehow it was accessible to him, and he was able to do that. But the really interesting crux of that story is that he went down and had a nip but only after he realized that he was overlooked when it was time to board a lifeboat. He had been missed on his assigned lifeboat assignment. He wasn't given the directions to board, and he realized, okay, it's going to be me in the sea. And he looked at the deck chairs and he thought, if I throw all these out into the ocean, maybe when I'm in there, there might be something for me to cling to, which was really genius of him to think of that. And then it's also a great story about camaraderie, because when he couldn't get onto a lifeboat, he held onto the hand of someone who worked for him in the bakery. And he gave him his hand and helped him survive. So a really amazing story.
Yeah, I love his story, and it's a shame that it is typically summed up in memory as just he's the guy who was drinking, which actually there was at least one other documented account of someone who like downed an entire bottle of gin. And Jack Thayer apparently thought to himself, well, that guy's not going to make it. And then on the Carpathia, it's one of the first guys he ran into, apparently. I don't have his name in front of me, but I mean, but honestly, yeah. But if you're in the situation, you're like, well, it's all gone to crap. I could definitely see myself having a nip or two. But I love that he had a nip, but not at the expense of doing his job, right? He was there at Lifeboat 10, assisting to load it, making sure it was provisioned. He's going through the boat, throwing things overboard to help both himself, but other passengers too. And then what a wonderful story that he runs into a colleague, and I believe it was on Lightoller's boat, right? So Lightoller's saying, hey, no, we don't have any room. And then he just holds the hand of a colleague until help eventually comes and they transfer into a not overturned lifeboat. His story is absolutely one of my favorite in the entire Titanic legend.
Yes, it was an overturned collapsible, and the cook, Isaac Maynard,
Maynard, that's it.
Yeah, Maynard, and they clasped their hands in the middle of the ocean, and then he stayed in that position until he could get a spot on that overturned collapsible. And it's such a story of survival. And also, like you mentioned, I'm so glad you did, Damon, about his work ethic, because I love that drinking brought that story to the surface, because we can all learn so much from Charles. And he went on to survive even more ship tragedies, more experiences, and I won't get into all that, but he went on to work for many, many years. He moved to New Jersey, Paterson, New Jersey, and just was a pretty amazing man. And that was one of my favorite parts of putting my book together, is learning about these people. And people would say to me, this is so sad. How can you focus on such sadness all the time with these stories? But to me, they were so uplifting when I think of stories like Charles.
Yes, and that's one thing I want to encourage people. Well, first off, want to encourage people to go out and buy your book. It's phenomenal, and I feel like the gateway drug is, hey, it talks about cocktails and food on the Titanic, but it's so much more than that. You tell so many great personal, individual stories. Things that aren't in necessarily A Night to Remember in the classics, because as time goes by, we learn. There's been more research that we've learned more of the stories that may not have been known back in the 50s. So you bring so many of those to light, and that's absolutely one of my favorites. Another thing in your book that I found really interesting and wonderful was the bibliography is huge and extensive, and I would imagine different than a typical Titanic book. I think there must be unique challenges in studying more of a, for lack of a better word, a niche topic regarding Titanic as opposed to the entire wreck. I mean, I would think, Walter Lord doesn't go down and do research at Delmonico's trying to find recipes and menus from 1911 and 12. I think there's probably unique challenges in the angle toward the disaster that your book takes, as opposed to just let's tell the Titanic story.
Yes, and you're so spot on. And the challenges continue, Damon, with every request for snack foods with presentations.
Right.
Still cooking up a storm, making plum puddings. It takes 4 hours to steam a plum pudding, but to really experience all that, I tested all those recipes. I found those people. That was the real challenge, was finding people who are making things like Connor McClelland and the chef Connor McClelland and other chefs, and all the great work they're doing. And some of it was hard to find, but my goal was to really tell an interpretive story and not just, okay, let me just spew information at the reader, but to really show how it's modern day relevant as well. And things people are doing now to celebrate it. I really tried to make it as comprehensive as I could. I also talked to a lot of survivor relatives. Adolphus Selfeld was a first-class passenger who wrote a fabulous letter home on the day he boarded the Titanic in Southampton, England, on September 10th. He had lunch and he wrote home to his wife, Gertrude, who was about 10 years older than him, by the way. He wrote home about what he had for lunch and the Spatzen beer that he drank. He washed it all down with Spatzen beer. He had roast pork and cauliflower, and he couldn't believe it was all free. He just had a really wonderful lunch. And I talked with his great niece. She lives in Canada now. And it was just so exciting to do that. But as you mentioned, it really was a big bibliography, probably, one of the bigger ones I've done. And it was because of all that comprehensiveness. But I really hope that it ended up helping so much with really giving, a lot of deep cuts, a lot of firsthand information. And it probably was more, looking at menus, like Delmonico's menus. And the New York Public Library at the time had a lot of great menus that they had stored and made available digitally. So yeah, it was a very different bibliography than, what might be in another book.
Yeah, it was fantastic. Lots of, not instead of just being a book bibliography, I mean, lots of references to magazine articles and things I'm sure that are out of print now. And so a lot of work to dig in that as deep as you did. And it is absolutely worth it. So we made a Robert Burns cocktail. We made some shortbread cookies. If someone were to do this at home, what would you want them to think about as they taste it?
Love and sharing with people, and maybe have a book club meeting, have your friends read not necessarily my book, but maybe read a book like The Six, or a Titanic based book, and then do something like this to be interpretive with the conversation, or have a movie night. There are so many different versions of the Titanic story in different movies. There's a movie from the 1950s that a lot of people haven't seen. Do something really special like that and show friends and family you love them with making something special. It's so easy to make these cookies. And if you're growing lavender in your garden, which I know a lot of you are, this is a great way to showcase the lavender and get people together, keep these stories alive. It's just so important that we're doing this. So I'm so grateful to you, Damon, for getting this conversation started.
Yeah. So one final question, which I'm going to try and ask to all my guests. So if you could place one Titanic related object, a document, a picture, a book, or a story in front of someone who was newly curious about the Titanic, what would it be and why?
Well, I love that you asked this question on your show, and I think people are going to love this, but being asked and hearing about it. When you asked me, you mentioned it to think about it, and I didn't need more than 2 seconds to think about this, because to me, okay, so we talked in the show about the recipe being an artifact. And in this case, it's a menu. And it's a very special menu. There aren't many menus that have survived, as I mentioned. My goal is to one day have one of these menus, and this one I know for sure is not available, but if it was, I would be more inclined to try to do everything I could to try to buy it. So Elise Lurette was a woman from Paris. She was traveling in first class with the Spencer family. And Elise saved a menu from lunch, and she had crossed 2 items out. And I thought, well, this is the most telling menu we have because someone,
What did she cross out?
2 items. One was Welsh rarebit, and Welsh rarebit is not rabbit. A lot of
Okay.
people, it is a almost like an open-faced grilled cheese with fondue sauce, like a fondue cheese sauce on it, but it's not really, it's just sort of the best way to describe it. It's a piece of bread that's broiled with a cheese sauce over it. The cheese sauce can either be made with beer or wine, and it's usually a mix of cheeses, one of them being Gruyere. And I love to put dry mustard, powdered mustard, and paprika in mine. I like to make mine with beer. And then you broil that in the oven with a little paprika sprinkled on it. Now, this is one of the things we don't know was hers with wine or beer. We don't know that, but probably wine, just knowing kind of the culture of first class. It was probably wine and the cheese on the Welsh rarebit. So that was one of the items.
But why scratched out that? Oh my God, that sounds so yummy.
Oh, it's
hopefully,
so good.
hopefully
And
she's lactose intolerant or something. That's why she scratched it out.
well, I don't know, but it might be a dairy thing because I'll tell you in a minute the other one. But first, I'll just tell you real quick. I love to make party size Welsh rarebits. I call them sliders. And I put them on little toast points and I broil them that way. So that's a really great way to do it. But you can make a great big plate of it with a big piece of bread. The other item was eggs Omer Pasha. And I had to really dig deep to figure out what this was. Have you heard of shakshuka?
I have actually. I made it for my wife on our very first date that I cooked for her. So I am, and there's so much you can do with it. I'm curious. I'm assuming this is like a version of that.
Yes, that's so neat. What a neat connection. And so shakshuka is very similar to eggs Omer Pasha. It showed up several years after Titanic in a newspaper that I found. And that's where I figured out, oh, that's what that was that Elise crossed out. And some people have thought that maybe she crossed these out because she tried them and said, okay, now I've tried these and I'm going to move on to the next thing. But there were only 2 items, and it was hard to believe she would have done that. I personally think she said, I'm not ordering these. And she said, we're not ordering these.
Oh man, what a shame because yeah, they both sound amazing.
Yes, and for those who don't know what shakshuka is, it's eggs baked in a tomatoey sauce. How did you make yours?
So I do like crushed tomato or diced or crushed. I don't know, combination maybe. And I just, well, I actually, my wife is Hispanic origin. And so I made kind of a more of a Hispanic version. I started with some chorizo, added some red and yellow peppers, a little jalapeno, but then, yeah, then the tomatoes. And then, yeah, then basically you poach them essentially. You crack the tomatoes into the bed of vegetables that you've created, put the lid on, and just poach them in their own juices. It's it's amazing. It's a great, it's the perfect dinner for breakfast for dinner dish.
Isn't it wonderful? Yeah, I was really shocked when I found out what it was. I thought, gosh, I would have been just loving that. That would have been a great way to
Yeah,
have lunch.
I'm assuming that version is a little bit more specific. I mean, most shakshuka is like, I don't know, take whatever's in your pantry and make something vegetable-y and crack eggs on top of it. I'm assuming this is more specific. I'd love to know what the spin of their version was. And definitely something I'll be crafting in the future for sure.
And all this surmising that we're going through in our conversation, it's why I'm so grateful for your podcast, because this is what we need in our generation, our era. We need this type of history keeping, and history sharing. And, they didn't have podcasts in 1912. So there's so many things we don't know. So thank you for what you're doing, Damon.
Oh, well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure having you aboard, so to speak. We began with a cocktail and a cookie, but what we followed was a trail of ingredients, names, recipes, hotels, musicians, bartenders, lifeboats, and memory. But that's the power of provenance. Sometimes it begins with an object, sometimes it begins with a document, but sometimes it begins with whiskey, vermouth, absinthe, bitters, and a twist of lemon, and a shortbread that goes perfectly with all of it. So, because sometimes the most interesting question is not what happened, it is how we know what happened. Thanks again to Veronica Hinke for joining me for our first Sip and Ship. And yes, you may have heard a few extra vocal slips, and conversational detours along the way. What can I say? This was a true Sip and Ship episode. The cocktail was real, the shortbread was real, and the conversation was allowed to breathe a little. Also, this was not only the first episode I recorded for the Titanic Provenance Files, it was the first interview I had ever recorded, ever. So there's that. You can find more about this episode, including notes on the Robert Burns cocktail, shortbread, and Titanic's food and drink world at titanicprovenance.com. We'll also have a link in the show notes to Veronica Hinke's fantastic book, Last Night Out on the Titanic. Our next full episode will be Case File 004, where I'll be joined by Mark Churnside for a close look at Collapsible Boat A, the lifeboat that was not really launched, the survivors who reached it, and the strange afterlife it had after Titanic sank. And next week, be sure to check out Case Notes 003, our shorter follow-up to this case file. I already know there's at least one clarification I want to make, and we'll also update our ongoing research into Walter Lord's anonymous letter writer. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe to the Titanic Provenance Files wherever you listen. Leave a rating or review if your app allows it, and share the show with someone who loves Titanic history. I'm Damon Henrichs. Thanks for listening to the Titanic Provenance Files, the story of Titanic through the evidence she left behind. Until next week, follow the evidence.